This one I've almost convinced myself to stop telling people. Not because it wasn't real, because every time I tell it, I watch people start doing the math in their heads, looking for the rational explanation, and I can see the exact moment they decide I must have missed something obvious. And maybe I did. I've thought about it enough times that I honestly can't be sure anymore. But I'm going to tell it anyway, because the alternative is carrying it around alone. And I'm tired of doing that. I was 28 and living in a basement apartment, which I mention only because the light situation in the place was already a little strange. Basements get a particular quality of dark, heavy, total, the kind that doesn't apologize for itself. I'd gotten used to it. I had a lamp on a timer in the living room so I'd never have to walk into complete blackness when I got home late, and that was just a habit I'd built without thinking too hard about it. The lamp in question was a floor lamp. Tall, dark green shade, a mechanical timer plugged into the outlet behind it. I'd set the timer to turn on at 5:30 p.m. and off at 11 p.m. every day. I'd been using that same timer for 2 years. I knew its rhythm the way you know the sound of your own refrigerator, without really knowing you know it. The first time the lamp came on at 2:47 a.m., I thought I'd bumped the timer somehow. I got up, checked it, and the little dial was exactly where it always was. I moved it a tiny bit just in case and went back to bed. 2 weeks later, same thing. 2:47 a.m., lamp on. Living room lit. I'm standing in my hallway in the dark, squinting at it. I started watching the timer more carefully. I started unplugging it before bed. The third time the lamp came on at 2:47 a.m. It wasn't plugged in. I want you to understand that I checked this. I went to bed with the lamp unplugged from the wall, the plug sitting visibly on the hardwood floor next to the outlet. I woke up at 2:47 a.m. to the living room being lit. The plug was still on the floor. The lamp was on. I stood in the hallway for a long time after that. What I've never been able to fully explain to anyone is the quality of those 3 minutes before I made myself go back to bed. The apartment felt different at that hour. Not threatening, exactly. More like occupied, the way a room feels when someone has recently left it and the air hasn't settled back to normal yet. Warm in a way that basement apartments at 2:47 in February are not typically warm. I had the lamp checked. There was nothing wrong with it electrically. I had the outlets checked. I bought a new timer and a new lamp. It happened twice more, and then it stopped. Here's the part I held back until the end. I asked the building manager, mostly as a casual question, whether anything unusual had ever happened in my unit. She gave me a bit of an odd look and said that the previous tenant had been an older woman who had lived there for 11 years and that she had passed away in the apartment, in the living room, and that it had been about a year before I moved in. The building manager didn't know what time. I didn't ask again.
I haven't used the upstairs hallway light in 7 months. I know that sounds like a weird thing to lead with, but it's relevant, I promise. Just let me back up. I moved into my place in early March. It's an older house, built sometime in the late 70s, and it has that particular kind of charm that basically means things creak and the heating is unpredictable. I rented it because it was cheap and had a finished basement I could use as a home office, and honestly, at the time, that was enough. I didn't need much. It was just me and my dog, a 5-year-old beagle named Otis, and we were both pretty low maintenance. The attic access was a pull-down hatch in the upstairs hallway ceiling. I noticed it the first day I moved in, the way you notice something and mentally file it away as not my problem. The landlord mentioned it had some old insulation up there, and a few boxes left by the previous tenant that he'd get around to clearing out. I said sure, no rush, and that was basically the last time either of us thought about it. Or so I assumed. I want to be clear about something. I am not, and have never been, someone who spooks easily in a house. I lived alone through most of my 20s. I've stayed in places that had genuinely odd histories and slept fine. I'm telling you this because I want you to understand that what I'm about to describe, the way I started rationalizing things, wasn't me being dramatic. I was actively trying not to be dramatic. The first time I heard it was a Tuesday in late April. I know it was Tuesday because I'd just had a work call run until almost 9 p.m., and I was annoyed about it. I was in the kitchen making a late dinner when I heard what sounded like someone shifting their weight directly above me. One slow, deliberate creak. Then nothing. I stood there for a second. Then I went back to stirring my pasta and decided it was the house settling. Old houses do that. Everyone says old houses do that, and they're right. Old houses do that. It wasn't a big deal, except it happened again the following Thursday, and the Thursday after that. And here's the thing I only understand now, looking back, it was always at night. Never during the day. Never when I had my upstairs window open and air was moving through. Always after around 8:30 p.m., always from the same general area above the kitchen, and always that same quality of sound. Not a random creak, a deliberate, weighted creak, like someone trying to be careful about where they stepped. I told myself it was an animal, squirrels or raccoons getting into the attic, which I'd heard can happen in older houses. I even Googled it. I watched 2 YouTube videos about how to tell if you have a raccoon in your attic. I felt very responsible and adult about the whole thing. Then came the night that I couldn't explain away. It was a Friday. I remember because Otis had been restless all day, and I'd taken him on an extra long walk to tire him out, and by 11:15 p.m. we were both exhausted. I'd just gotten into bed when I heard it. Not one creak this time. A sequence. A slow, careful sequence of sounds moving from one end of the attic to the other, directly above the upstairs hallway, stopping, then starting again. Otis, who was asleep at the foot of the bed, lifted his head, and then he did something I had never seen him do in 5 years. He got up, walked to the bedroom door, sat down directly in front of it, and started this low, continuous growl that he just didn't stop, didn't bark, didn't do anything dramatic, just sat there with every muscle tense, staring at the door, and growling at whatever was on the other side of it. I did not get up and open that door. I won't pretend I did something brave. I lay there for almost 2 hours with my phone in my hand and the bedroom door closed, and eventually the sound stopped, and eventually Otis lay back down, and eventually I fell into one of those weird, thin sleeps where you're not sure if you're actually asleep or just lying there with your eyes closed. The next morning, I called my landlord. He came by that afternoon and pulled down the attic hatch, and we both looked up at the space. Insulation, boxes, dust, nothing. He made a comment about animals and mentioned a pest control company he'd used before, and I nodded and tried to look like a normal, reasonable person who hadn't spent the previous Friday night rigid with fear in her own bedroom. He left. I went back to work. I told myself it was over. It wasn't over. 3 weeks later, a Thursday again, I heard it again. Same area, same rhythm, same slow, deliberate weight moving carefully across the floor of a space that was supposed to be empty. I called a friend this time instead of my landlord. She came over on a Saturday with her boyfriend, who is one of those people who confidently volunteers to check things, and he went up through the hatch with a flashlight while we stood below. He was up there for about 4 minutes. When he came back down, his face was different. He'd found a cleared space in the far corner of the attic, behind 2 of the old storage boxes. The insulation had been pushed aside, and in that space, there was a flattened section of old cardboard and a wadded-up blanket. Someone had been sleeping in my attic. The police came. They found a few other things I won't describe in detail, some food wrappers, evidence that whoever it was had been coming and going through a small exterior vent that was just barely large enough. Based on everything, the officer told us they thought someone had been up there for possibly 2 months. 2 months of Thursday nights, of lying in bed listening. I moved out the following week. I don't live there anymore, and I'm not interested in finding out what I might have heard if I'd opened that bedroom door on that particular Friday night. Instead of lying there, decide not to. The upstairs hallway light in my current apartment works perfectly fine. I just don't use it much at night anymore. I don't really know why.
I need to start with something I don't usually say out loud. I almost didn't report this. Not because I wasn't scared, because I was scared, and then I was embarrassed about being scared. And then I spent about 4 days convincing myself. I was wrong before. The thing that finally made me call the non-emergency line was my neighbour, completely unprompted, knocking on my door to tell me she'd seen someone in my backyard the previous night. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I live in a ground floor unit in a building with 4 apartments. It's a converted house, which means the ground floor has actual windows that go almost to the ground. Big old double-hung windows, the kind with the rope and pulley system that nobody uses anymore. My bedroom window faces the backyard, which is shared but rarely used. It's mostly overgrown grass and a dying oak tree, and in the corner, one of those rusted metal clothesline posts that hasn't had a line on it in probably 30 years. I'm telling you all of this so you can picture it clearly. Because the picture matters, the window in my bedroom has a screen on the outside, and, on the inside, a set of those thin cotton curtains that do basically nothing except give the illusion of privacy. I left the window cracked most of that summer, just a few inches for air, because my bedroom got unreasonably warm. I noticed the handprint on a Saturday morning in late July at around 8:15 a.m. I was making my bed and I pushed the curtain aside to open the window fully, and it was just there, on the inside of the glass, a single handprint, palm and four fingers slightly smeared at the top like whoever made it had pressed hard and then dragged upward slightly. I stood there for a while. My immediate thought was that it was mine. I tried to match my hand to it. It was bigger than my hand, noticeably bigger, with a wider palm and longer fingers. I tried to think of the last time anyone had been in my bedroom. A friend had stayed over about 3 weeks earlier, but she is roughly my size, and this print was not a small hand. I cleaned it off and told myself I was being strange. The following Saturday morning, same time, same routine. I pushed the curtain aside. There was a new one, same window, same position on the glass, same hand by the look of it, same wide palm, same slight drag at the top. Pressed from the inside, I called my landlord. I called him twice that day. He came by, looked at the window, looked at the screen, which was undisturbed, and said he didn't see how anyone could have gotten in. He tested the window lock. He talked about condensation, about how glass does strange things in humidity, about how it was probably nothing. I nodded and let him leave, and then I went and sat in my living room for the rest of the afternoon, not doing anything in particular. I started leaving the window closed at night. I started checking the lock before bed. I started doing that thing where you tell yourself, you're just being careful, and it doesn't mean you're afraid, even though you are. I slept badly for about 3 weeks, woke up at odd hours, lay there in the particular dark of a room where you're listening without quite knowing what you're listening for. And then my neighbour knocked on my door. She is in her 60s, lives directly above me, grows tomatoes on her balcony, and knows more about the building's history than anyone. She knocked on a Tuesday evening and told me, almost apologetically, that she'd been meaning to mention it. She'd been up late the previous Thursday and seen someone standing in the backyard, close to the building, near my window. She'd thought it was a resident at first. Then she thought it was odd that they were just standing there. Then they walked back into the far corner of the yard, behind the clothesline post, and she lost them in the dark. She said she probably should have said something sooner. She looked genuinely sorry about it. I called the non-emergency line that night. An officer came, took a report, walked around the outside of the building with a flashlight, found some scuff marks in the soil. Under my window, he said, consistent with someone having stood there. He couldn't say for how long. He gave me the case number and some general advice about window locks, and left. The handprints stopped after that. I don't know why they stopped. I don't know if whoever it was simply moved on, or noticed something that discouraged them, or if the police presence scared them off. I don't know how many times they stood there before my neighbour saw them. I don't know how many mornings I pushed that curtain aside and cleaned the glass without really thinking about it. What I know is that it was pressed from the inside. The screen was always latched, and the gap I left in that window was exactly large enough for an arm. I sleep with the window closed now, even in July, even when the room gets warm. Some things you stop needing to explain to yourself after a while. You just do them and don't look at the window, and that's enough.